Hello, this is the lecture for Ancient and Medieval History on Friday, the 30th of April, 2021. That means next week we are in May?
Yeah, somehow.
Oh, how time flies. On the one hand, it flies. On the other hand, this year has dragged. God, dragged. Anyway, I'm going to start us out with some images that pertain to Charlemagne and the Carolingians. Would you please shut the lights off, Evan? Thank you. And let's see how it shows up on the screen. Oh, that shouldn't be that bad. So, here we have Charlemagne's imperial crown. This gives you a sense of the style. You know, by modern standards, it's very heavy and sort of clunky, but it has these arches. It's made of gold, gems. And here we, of course, have the cross of Christ superseding it all. So this is, in its own way, quite beautiful, but it gives you a sense of the art of the time. Now here, on the left, is a famous gold image of what people think Charlemagne may have looked like. You can see down at the bottom there are fleurs-de-lis, which later becomes a symbol of the French. And there are eagles here, which from Roman times are symbols of imperial power. And you've got sort of a different crown up here, but still surmounted by crosses. And that one even has an arch above. And here is a manuscript from Charlemagne's time with what looks like an imperial seal. You pour some wax out and you press your ring into it, and that's the seal that you use to make sure that everyone knows that it's from you. Let's see what the seal looks like. It looks like a guy, sort of a portrait bust anyway. Here we have a page which gives you a sense of what some medieval art was like. You have Charlemagne himself kneeling before an altar, being admonished or talked to by an angel of the Lord. And what you get here is a sense of Charlemagne, the emperor of the West, accountable to God and responsible for fulfilling God's commands as both King of the Franks and Western Roman Emperor. But it also gives you a sense of the cartoonish nature of art at that point in time. Remember, people, for the most part, are struggling to survive. The comforts that Romans enjoyed were not common. And people had all they could do to get ink and make it out of natural materials and make pens. And so everything was a triumph. This may look primitive to you or me, two-dimensional, but that didn't matter. What mattered to the artist and to the reader was the idea of it. And the idea of it we've already seen. Charlemagne, the most powerful man, kneeling before a messenger of God, accountable and responsible to a higher power. And that's an important part of Christendom. Here's a fairly common style of medieval art. By the way, as to Charlemagne's conspicuous faith, there are times when Charlemagne in armor will get down on his knees and kneel walk his way towards a cathedral, praying every step of the way, and then kneel walk up the steps of the church and into the church and to the spot in front of the altar. This is an act of devotion. It's considered to be, and there are echoes of this today in Roman Catholic and even in Eastern Orthodox ceremony. The sense of publicly going through a ritual where the ruler humbles himself in front of everyone before God and engages in something that is physically painful Being on your knees that long when you're wearing armor is just intensely painful. But that pain is willingly endured as a sign of one's devotion to God. Now, here we have Charlemagne and his barons. And you see who Charlemagne is, and you see his various barons. You see outside. It's two-dimensional. In its own way, it's as two-dimensional as that ancient Egyptian art that we see on the walls of temples and on the interior of pyramids and tombs. You know, the sort of Egyptian where you're posed in this weird two-dimensional way. Medieval art is not really capable of or interested in a sense of depth. About the closest you come is you can see the part of Charlemagne's throne, that I'm obscuring, of course, sticking sort of forward and out. But that forward line is sort of obscured here by this part of a baptismal font, or whatever it is, this shelf or banister. And it really is, I mean, yeah, you've got walls coming out, you've got walls coming out, you've got a ceiling coming in. So there is a recognition that three-dimensional space is a thing and does exist by the artist. But in no way is it realistic or persuasive in its three-dimensionality. This is a two-dimensional image. And again, the sophistication is not in the image. The focus is on wise king instructing and being in the presence of his chief assistants. Okay, here we see sort of a multiple image that deals with a lot of what Charlemagne and his era in the Carolingian times is famous for. We're going to get a look at his cathedral at Aix-la-Chapelle. Here is an equestrian statue of Charlemagne, and you can see he looks very different here from how he looked in that golden statue, from how he looked in that praying woodcut, and how he looked with his barons. You know why? A couple of reasons. First off, people change with time. One of the sad things that can happen when you lose a loved one is sometimes, however close they were to you, you have difficulty picturing their face after a while. You might think that's impossible. I'd never forget what they look like. Well, if you've known somebody for long enough, sometimes, this doesn't happen to everyone, but sometimes your mind has difficulty deciding which face you're going to remember. For example, I knew my mom from when she was in her 20s until now she's, very old. Do I imagine mom when I was little? Do I imagine mom when I was in high school? Which is what I usually do. Do I imagine mom, which is the last time I lived with her full time, when I was getting married? Or when I visited her when Tina and I were in Maine? Do I imagine mom as she got older, as she needed to go into a home? Which mom do I picture? See, 20, 30 years from now, when you think back to high school, you probably will be able to see a few faces and remember a few names without much difficulty because you know these people when you were in high school. But if you have a friend that you keep from high school through college or whatever comes after high school, through your young adulthood years, through the point where many of you are going to have families of your own, which face do you remember? So I think part of it is that Charlemagne is a ruler for so long, from being a young man to being an old man. But part of it also is they didn't have cameras. And so sometimes an artist was trying to picture what the emperor would look like, and maybe he'd be lucky enough to know what the emperor looks like by seeing him personally. But maybe he just hears what the emperor looks like. Strong nose, big beard, or in this case, strong king with mustache. I think that's a mustache. Often, the artist is not trying to draw what Charlemagne really looks like. What do you think they're trying to draw? If you had to guess, would anyone be willing to offer a speculation as to what the artist is trying to do? Please.
Maybe portray them in the way that they are seen to the country, the city-state, in like the way they're here based on reputation and trying to do justice to that.
Indeed.
But if it's like they're a bad leader, maybe they're trying to portray them as more mean-looking, rude, that kind of way they stand, depending on if they have seen them or not, what their reputation is, if they've done battle with them, or if they've seen them in like the Colosseum. It depends on the artist.
Yeah. And by the way, your answer went into much more detail than I expected. Thank you. Because what she said is basically right, and I'm going to summarize it. Tell me if I'm wrong. The artist isn't drawing the man. The artist is drawing the office and the circumstance, the situation. So, what would you picture a great general like? Well, that's Charlemagne on horseback or in the field. What would you picture Charlemagne, a great priest or prayerful ruler like? Well, that's Charlemagne on his knees. What would you picture an emperor like? So, Charlemagne in different situations is going to be the embodiment of whatever the artist thinks is virtuous in those situations. Is that approximating what you're saying, or am I missing something? Okay. Does anyone have anything to add? It's dark, so I have to look around more closely. The point is this. I've tried telling you that ancient people, and this is true of medieval people also, aren't extremely interested in the facts. They're interested in the truth. What is the difference between the facts and the truth? Well, the truth is what's important about something, what something means to the world, what something means to life. Is this good or evil? Is this right or wrong? That's the truth. And ancient peoples who wanted moral guidance and medieval peoples who wanted moral guidance, or who at least the people paying for the art thought needed moral guidance, were going to be given those truths. The facts don't matter. Because facts, as far as the ancient medieval person were concerned, see, we live in a society that's so pseudoscientific that for us, facts are so important. Show me the data. Show me the statistics. Winston Churchill, my favorite politician and statesman, once said that there are lies, I'm sorry, I've got to say it right. There are lies, there are damnable lies, and then there are statistics. How could he say that? Aren't statistics the truth? No. Statistics are numbers that people crunch. They are facts that are cherry-picked to tell a story. Even statisticians admit that they ignore what they call outliers, which is they ignore certain facts that don't fit their preconceptions. Statistics are not facts. They are a way of selling an idea. They can be interesting in and of themselves, just like a picture or a poster or a slogan or a song can be interesting in and of itself, but they do not necessarily equate to truth. But so many people today assume facts equals truth. Oh, let's talk about COVID in any of its forms. Let's look at the data and see what the science says. There is no such thing as the science. There's what certain scientists say, and other scientists who agree with them, and other scientists who disagree with them, and other people who are not scientists saying, we don't live in a technocracy where scientists rule over us, poor, stupid plebs. We live in a republic where elected officials should take scientific information into account, but not slavishly. Because the ultimate political decisions are made by elected officials, not by scientists. Anyway, that's why the art is different. Because it's not really about how the man looked, it's about what he was to the people and to the nation in different circumstances. And here's a famous woodcut of a man studying at a desk. Okay, let's get into a little bit more detail. By the way, if people have ideas and are raising their hands and I'm not seeing them, just say excuse me, and I will try to give what time I can. Okay. Here we have men struggling at desks. Now, yesterday I referenced a woodcut of Charlemagne struggling with his letters. And I looked for it because I remember it in my mind. Didn't find it. Instead, what I found are these. The pose is quite similar, and the writing desk is both is virtually identical, but also show evidence of the use of shading to create a three-dimensional effect. What these are different images of people struggling with their letters. What I saw was a woodcut of Charlemagne with a beard, sitting at a desk in almost this exact pose, with a book in front of him and a pen in his hand. And he really looked like he was struggling with his letters, like he was struggling with this task of reading and writing. But what I've got are things that are similar. I didn't find the same thing. And they both are touted as authentic to the era of Charlemagne. But this is a very unusual medieval style in that it seems very free. You see a lot of long lines and a bit of freedom in the way that the robes' wrinkles are shown. Whereas this, with the saint around, this may be Saint Thomas. Let's see. Oh, this is Saint Matthew. This is an indication of sainthood in that you have the halo around the head. But I couldn't find the Charlemagne woodcut. Sorry. Now here's the interior I was talking about. This is the cathedral at Aix-la-Chapelle that Charlemagne had built. And what you see is at... Why do I keep walking in front? Is that I have my pointer. Got my stick. Okay. So here is the ground level. And I'm still walking in front. You can see the... Does this look at all similar to you? Have you seen anything recently that sort of has that same image, that same visual? Do any of you remember what it was? All right.
The mosque in Spain.
The mosque in Spain. The mosque at Cordoba. That's exactly right. They have this sort of light dark thing. So Charlemagne's arches mimic the mosque, the great mosque at Cordoba. But here you've got the ground level colonnade, then you've got, well, it's not really a colonnade, it's a set of arches. Then you've got the second floor set of arches, then you've got the third floor set of arches. And it's this beautiful space dominated by a bit of a dome. Small dome, but still a dome. And here's the same space from another point of view. So these are some of the works of art famous from Carolingian times. Also, there are the various monasteries producing illuminated manuscripts and so forth. Any questions about any of this? Please get the lights. So, thank you. I'm going to open up the windows too. Charlemagne manages to unify an empire that is at the heart of Western Europe. And it is considered a great turning point in history because this empire is going to form the basis of some very important modern nations, including, well, let's take a look. If the fan bothers you, please feel free to move. Including, getting up to my map, up here. I forgot to tell you something yesterday, and it was at the beginning of the story. Remember I talked about the alliance between the popes and the kings of the Franks? Let me explain the basis of that alliance. There were deep divisions between the conquerors of the old Western Roman Empire and the conquered. And one of those differences was religious. They were both Christians, but the peasantry, the lower classes, they were Catholics. And the upper classes, the conquerors, they were Arian Christians. The Franks are, by far, the first of the barbarian tribes, fairly early in their rule over what we now call France, to abandon Arianism and become Catholic. Why does that matter? Because by abandoning Arianism and becoming Catholic, it's no longer a question of it being alienated from your own population. This thing that had separated upper class and lower class no longer separates them. It unifies them. We're all Catholics now. And as we are all Catholics now, from our rulers down to our lowest of the low, we can worship together. We can have sympathy for one another as co-religionists. We can be one people. And this serves to make the Frankish kingdom the strongest kingdom of all of these because of that religious unity. And that strength is further expressed in the Pope's appreciation for these Germanic conquerors becoming Catholics. So the special alliance was because the kings of the Franks chose to abandon a divisive denomination of Christianity and to adopt the same denomination of their people. And it unifies and strengthens the entire nation. So, I hadn't told you that. That's important to know. Okay. Charlemagne lives long enough to hear about the first Viking raids on his northern coasts. But they're really not a part of his story. They are going to be told about later. Most of the time, he looks back at the end of his reign with pride. What happens when he dies? Well, there are two ways of handling family inheritance. One way, and I'll give you the vocab word later so you don't need to write it down right now, is called primogeniture. Primogeniture means firstborn. And what it has to do with is the idea that the firstborn son, or if there is a female inheritance allowed, the firstborn child inherits everything. You don't divide the legacy. You keep everything unified. In return for inheriting everything, the firstborn son, usually, sometimes the firstborn child, is responsible for making sure that the rest of the family is taken care of, has a good job, good income, isn't in crisis. But they are able to take the family's legacy and grow it when they get married, and then send that unified legacy to their children. Primogeniture may seem unfair if you have brothers or sisters, and you have to imagine that only the oldest born gets to inherit the family wealth. But it keeps the family powerful. But Charlemagne doesn't do that. By the time of Charlemagne's grandchildren, his one empire is going to become three. Roughly divided like this. In the west is what will become France. In the east is what will become Germany. In the center is briefly called Lotharingia, the land of Lothar, because of the guy who inherits the middle part. But it is later, and for most of the time, called Burgundy. So, France in the west, Germany in the east, and between them, Burgundy. If you look on a modern map, you'll see France. You'll see Germany. You won't see Burgundy. Because Burgundy is like a midget wrestler between two giant heavyweight wrestling champions. Being in the middle of France and Germany is like being in the middle of Germany and Russia, being between them. Poland has that lovely honor of being between Germany and Russia. Consequently, Poland wasn't even a country for much of the last 500 years because the Germans and the Russians split the country between them and just conquered it from east and west. Armenia has had the misfortune of being on a crossroads between whoever ruled Iran and Iraq and whoever ruled Syria and Palestine and maybe Turkey. So whoever was trying to conquer that part of the world would sort of go through Armenia. and take it over. So the Armenians and the Poles have a history of being frequently conquered. Oddly enough, you know who else has a history of this? And many of you have blood from this country? Ireland. Ireland. How is Ireland a crossroad of conquerors? Well, I'll get into that when we do the British Isles a little bit more, but I'm going to at least say this now. Everyone who is anyone in Western Europe who has ships conquers Ireland at some point in time. The Irish conquer the Scots. Then the Vikings conquer Ireland. Then the English conquer Ireland. Ireland gets conquered by everyone. There used to be a tourist campaign to try to encourage people to go to Ireland. Come to Ireland. It's a beautiful place to visit. And I can just, being a historian, all I could think of was, that's what the Vikings said. That's what the English said. That's what all the conquerors of Ireland said. Come to Ireland. It's a great place to visit and take over. In any event, Burgundy has the misfortune of being between two strong, aggressive countries. And over the centuries, Burgundy is going to be whittled down from the east and from the west. France will take some of the territory. Germany will take some of the territory. The sort of pathetic remnants of Burgundy are the countries of Holland or the Netherlands, Belgium, and Luxembourg. These are called the Low Countries, or the Benelux countries, for Belgium, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg, Benelux. That's it. That's all that's left. Burgundy is gone. Now, is this a good thing or a bad thing? Well, it depends on what you think is good for Europe. Charlemagne's unified empire was very popular, but it was a strong central government, or it was trying to be a strong central government. The fact that France and Germany separate and end up fighting Burgundy, as well as other things, that makes a lot of competition. And competition is one of the things that makes European civilization pop with such creativity, such technological advancement, that brings us from a society where we lived side by side with our farm animals 1,000 years ago and took baths twice a year, whether we needed it or not, to become the civilization that spread over, conquered the world, and put men on the moon. So, what is better? A common empire, a unified empire, or conflict? And that answer, well, the Europeans choose conflict because of the divided heritage. Anyway, that's what I've got about Charlemagne. Hopefully you understand the Holy Oak, the Song of Roland, the canal between the Rhine and Danube, the Point of Rhodes, the capital of Aix-la-Chapelle, and what Charlemagne did for books. Any questions on that before we move on? Okay. We're going to spend probably the rest of our Dark Ages in one country. Well, in one region, and that is Britain. And there are a couple of reasons for this. First of all, British history is a pretty good microcosm of Western European history at this time. Similar things happen to the other European countries that happen in Britain. But because Britain's an island, it actually is affected more dramatically than, say, a larger country like France, Burgundy, or Germany. We're also going to deal with Britain because Britain is our cultural ancestor. Now, I only have a few of my genetic ancestors that come from Britain. I have Irish ancestors, I have Cuban and Puerto Rican ancestors, some of whom came from Italy. So how is it that I can say that Britain is our cultural ancestor, particularly England is our cultural ancestor? Well, can anyone guess? How is Britain? How is England? How is England? Yes?
Because the 13 colonies, those people came from Britain.
Absolutely. The United States of America started out as a set of British or English colonies. That means that we inherit our ideas about how the world works and what is good in life from the English. Our notions of freedom were largely developed in England. And because of that, not only do we speak English as a nation rather than Spanish, French, Italian, or any of the native languages. But our political institutions, represented by that flag, the U.S. Constitution, is a descendant of English common law and English ideas of government, just the way you are a descendant of your grandfather or your grandmother. We come from England as England comes from Christendom, as Christendom comes from Rome, the Christian Church, the Greeks, and the Germans. Anyway, we're going to focus on that. So we start our story from Roman Britain to Norman England. Roman Britain is Britain at the time of the Roman Empire. The Norman conquest of England happens in the year 1066. So we're talking about a period of, not post 1066 AD. We're talking about a period of well over 500 years. About 700 or 800 years, actually. So, what we're talking about is the period known as Anglo-Saxon England. First, some geographical things. You've got in the area, and I will expect you to remember them. This is the island of Britain. The island of Britain includes the regions of England, Scotland, and Wales. The island of Britain has many sub-regions which we're going to go over. But this big island here is Britain. Off to the west, you can see a little tip of Ireland, which is the smaller of the two British Isles. So Britain is the big country here. And the people who lived in Britain when the Romans conquered it were a group of Celts called the Britons, not the English. Between Britain and the continental mainland of Europe is the English Channel. The English Channel is a narrow, turbulent body of water with strong wind, strong currents. It is difficult to sail and difficult to cross. And the English Channel has protected the island of Britain from European conquest again and again and again. The Romans succeeded in conquering, and the Normans succeeded in conquering, but they are the only two groups in the last 2,000, 2,500 years that have come from Europe to conquer Britain. Before that, the Celts conquered Britain. They took over from the people who built the actual Stonehenge. Now, between the island of Britain and the island of Ireland is the Irish Sea. So the Irish Sea is to the west of Britain. The North Sea is to the east. The North Sea separates Britain from the French, Belgian, and Dutch coasts, from Denmark. So the North Sea, the English Channel, the Irish Sea, and here's the island of Ireland here. This big island between Ireland and England, which you can see on both maps, although not to scale, is the Isle of Man. The Isle of Man is today an independent part of the United Kingdom. It's not part of England, Scotland, or Wales. It is its own crown dependency. Little tiny island of Man. And if you know anything about cat breeds, Manx cat, M-A-N-X, Manx cats come from the Isle of Man. Now, on Britain itself, you should know the three basic regions. England stretches from here around the south and up the east coast to about here. And it includes the Midlands as well. So England is in the south, in the east, along the east coast, and in the south center of the island of Britain. And by far, England becomes the strongest of the three, of a kingdom in the whole region of the British Isles, which is Britain, Ireland, Isle of Man. This little nub to the west of England is called Wales, and we'll learn why later. Not Wales as in, we live in this... God, my throat. We live in the sea. I love doing whale impressions. You may not like it, but I enjoy it. So that's why I do it, to keep me entertained. It's Wales, and it has to do with what the English called the Celts. They called them Velas, which means savages. So Wales is the land of the Wales is the land of the Velas, the savages. That's basically this area here. In the north, you've got what used to be called Pict land, land of the Picts, Picts. But in the Dark Ages, the Irish conquered the Picts, and the Irish who conquered the Picts called themselves Scots. So it becomes Scotland, and Scotland is this northern part of the island, and I didn't draw the top of the island because I wanted the map to be bigger down here. So England is in the south, in the east and center, Wales is in the west, southwest, and Scotland is in the north. North Sea, English Channel, Irish Sea. Any questions on that basic geography? Okay. The Romans conquer Britain under Claudius in the 1st century AD. And they do what a lot of conquerors do. They start out near the narrowest part of the English Channel, and they work their way northward and westward into the island. There are wars in Britain against the Romans, one of which is led by a queen, a warrior queen named Boadicea. And Boadicea almost kicked the Romans out for a temporary period, and then the Romans brought reinforcements and got her. The Romans end up conquering along the entire island from south to north, and they build 2 walls. Hadrian's Wall, about here, and the Antonine Wall, a little bit farther north, about here. Now, these walls were built because the Romans decided not to conquer all of Britain. Why on earth would a people as intelligent as the Romans start conquering an island without finishing it? The answer is that the island of Britain is almost the same size as the state of Idaho. And the state of Idaho is big. The island of Britain is bigger than the Romans expected. They keep going north expecting to find the end, and they don't. Eventually they find out where the end is, and it's way up here. So they decide they are not going to put the resources in necessary to conquer a giant area filled with nothing but angry barbarians. Instead, they're going to keep the good part of Britain, and they're going to build a wall here, and then when they're more ambitious, up here, in order to protect the good part of Britain from the Scaries. They don't even seriously consider moving across to Ireland. It's too much work for too little reward. Had there been gold found, or had there been a really interesting civilization there, or something to attract the Romans' interest, they might have changed their minds. But all there were a bunch of bog-dwelling primitives, as far as the Romans were concerned, so they just stopped. Now, this area south of Hadrian's Wall, over a period of 400 years, becomes very Romanized. The violent Celtic traditions of stripping down, painting yourself blue, putting red clay in your hair, and going into battle like a fearsome demon person, yeah, that's gone. And it's replaced by nice, orderly, later Christian, law-abiding Roman citizens. And the thing about nice, later Christian, law-abiding Roman citizens is they rely on the police and the military to protect them, just like we do. Some of us are capable of defending ourselves if something happens, but many of us don't expect that we should have to. That's what the police are for. They're there to provide law and order. Oh, God. Okay, I'll indulge this small little bit of selfishness. In the news this morning, there was a college professor who was running a Zoom meeting, caught on tape, if you will, berating a student for saying that the police were heroic. She didn't like that. She said the police are racist, yada, 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 and they should be abolished. And the student asked her, they should be abolished. Didn't you say at the beginning of the year, last fall, that a former student was stalking you? And she said, yeah. Didn't you then say that you filed a police report to keep him away from you? And she said, yeah. So you called the police when you needed their help. And she said, well, I would not today. I would not call the police. So you're telling me that you carry a gun all the time to protect yourself? No. If somebody broke into your house, you wouldn't call the police because you don't trust them, and you wouldn't have a gun because you don't believe in guns. What would you do? This meeting is over. Think about it. Or don't. But if you're going to talk about something as fundamental as defunding the only people that keep the crazies out of your home and that keep your property in your hands and that protect your rights, you'd better have something to replace them other than good intentions. The Britons didn't. On a couple of occasions, the governor of Britain took part in civil wars. The most famous, forget about it. On a couple of occasions, the Roman governors of Britain took part in civil wars, and sometimes they even took their armies out of Britain onto the continent. When that happened, the Picts usually attacked. But by the 5th century, by the 400s, Rome was getting weaker and weaker. Rome was in its last 75 years. And so what the Roman government does early in the 4th century is it says to the Britons, hey, you're free now. We're leaving. And they pull their armies out. They do build a few fortifications along what is called the Saxon shore that the Britons can use to fight off a group of Germans that are coming across the North Sea to raid their territory. The Britons don't say, freedom! They say, you're leaving? You're leaving? What are we gonna do? Well, you're on your own. Fly, be free. Thanks! They're leaving. Who's going to protect us? You are. Really? Because I'm so prepared to do that. I have no training. I'm a peaceful person. I've been taught to love my enemy. I'm not good with weapons. I'm clumsy. I'm not organized. I don't like smelling my own sweat. I don't want to be a soldier. War, what is it good for? Absolutely nothing. Say it again. You're leaving? We're going. Bye. So the Britons are now on their own in the early and mid 5th century, in the early and mid 400s. Now, the Saxons aren't stupid, and they learn of this. The Saxons are one of 3 tribes that come across the North Sea. I guess I'll put this on the map too. I should use a different color. Okay. We've got the Saxons. The Angles. I may have put the Angles in the wrong place. They might be on the other side of the Saxons. And the Jutes. The Jutes are from Jutland. The Anglo-Saxons are from what we would call Germany. And what they begin doing in late Roman times, because the Romans are weak, is instead of attacking by land, they go to sea. And so you've got streams of barbarians coming from the lands of the Angles, from the Saxons, and from the Jutes. And these streams of barbarians are attacking the British shore, everywhere from here down to here. At first, like good barbarians, they come to raid. They land, they kill, they rape, they steal, they burn, they leave. They come back next year and do the same thing. You fight them off or you don't. They don't strike with warning, they strike without warning. It's not like somebody comes, the Saxons will be here in 2 weeks. No, they just show up. And you've got to deal with it. The Romans are now on their own. And the Saxons realized that the Romanized Britons can't stop them. So the Saxons take Sussex, the land of the South Saxons, from the Britons, and Essex, the land of the East Saxons, from the Britons. And they're pushing west into what later will be called Wessex, the land of the West Saxons, and Mercia, the middle of the country, the middle of the island. It's in the late 400s or probably the early 500s AD that a legendary leader is born. His name is Artorius the Bear. Artorius the Bear is the legendary King Arthur, a Celtic war leader who builds an alliance of tribes of Britons to fight against the Saxons, the Angles, the Saxons, and the Jews. They're just called Saxons by this point. King Arthur and his Knights of the Round Table, according to legend, defeat the Saxons at the Battle of Baden Hill. But there's no record of who was there, whether there was a battle, or even where the heck Baden Hill is. What we glean from the legendary evidence is that whoever Arthur was based on, and he might have been based on a tribal chieftain named Aurelianus Ambrosius, or Vortigern, who were famous Celtic leaders of this time, British leaders of this time, is they slow down the Saxon advance. There are 3 British kingdoms that are set up while the Saxons end up in the east and south. You have Cornwall, which is this peninsula here. You've got Wales, the land of the savages, the Velas, which is this peninsula here. And you've got Strathclyde, the land that straddles the Clyde River and the Clyde Forth, and it's basically up here. Now, at first, the English don't control any of the west coast. So at first, these Celtic or British lands are unified into one big area that connects. But eventually, the English reach here, and Cornwall is separated from Wales, is separated from Strathclyde. So the British are being pushed westward. And sad for the British, they seem to forget their civilization. They go back to trying to live in the old Celtic way. They forget how Roman stuff works. They really go into a dark age. Now, what we know about the Saxons is when they land, there are 2 brothers who are in the lead. Their names are Hengist and Horsa. Hengist and Horsa are the first rulers of Anglo-Saxon England who stay. And they establish their territories in Essex and Sussex. And we will continue the story from there on Monday. Monday! Any questions, comments, or thoughts? I see none. Thank you. Come again.